When my 72-year-old father's voice cracked over the phone, begging me to fly across the country for the holidays because he was so terribly lonely, I didn't hesitate to buy a ticket, even though it meant rearranging my entire work schedule and spending over $1,000 on short-notice travel. My name is Julian, I am 34 years old, and for the past 5 years, my relationship with my father, Arthur, had been quiet. Ever since my mother passed away, he had retreated into a shell of silence in his suburban home 3 time zones away, living alone with his memories, his old books, and a deep-set melancholy that I had tried for years to gently thaw. When he called me 3 days before Christmas, sounding fragile, desperate, and genuinely broken, every resentment I had ever held vanished. A son doesn't turn his back on a pleading father, especially not during the holidays. The journey was exhausting. A 6-hour flight squeezed in a middle seat, a layover in a freezing Chicago terminal where the coffee tasted like burnt copper, and a delayed connection that stretched the trip into a grueling 14-hour ordeal. By the time my taxi pulled up to the curb of my father's house just after dusk, my lower back was locked up, my eyes burned from lack of sleep, and my knuckles were white around the handle of my heavy duffel bag. The house looked dark except for a single dim porch light flickering against the cold December frost. There was no festive wreath on the door, no glow of Christmas tree lights in the front window, just a heavy, stagnant quiet that felt entirely out of place for a home hosting a holiday reunion. I lugged my bag up the wooden steps, my breath pluming in the freezing air, and raised my hand to knock. But before my knuckles could hit the wood, I noticed the front door wasn't fully latched. It stood open by just an inch, casting a thin sliver of warm yellow light onto the welcome mat. Pushing the door open with a quiet creak, I stepped into the foyer. The smell hit me first, not the roasted turkey or cinnamon I had half hoped for, but the sharp, unmistakable scent of expensive perfume, stale wine, and the rich, buttery aroma of catered Italian food. "Dad?" I called out, shivering as I shrugged off my heavy winter coat. "Dad, I'm here." The flight was a nightmare, but I made it. From down the narrow hallway, past the living room where the family portrait still hung crookedly on the pale blue walls, came the sound of muffled laughter. It wasn't the lonely, raspy cough of an aging widower. It was light, melodic, and distinctly feminine. My stomach tightened into a hard, cold knot. I walked slowly down the hall, my boots silent on the runner rug, until I reached the threshold of the dining room. My father was sitting at the head of the mahogany dining table, wearing his good tweed blazer. Across from him sat a woman who couldn't have been a day over 35, her laugh echoing off the walls as she poured a generous splash of red wine into his glass. And standing right beside them, clearing away empty plates of pasta, was a teenage boy I had never seen before in my life. My father looked up, his eyes locking onto mine, and the color drained completely from his face. For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound in the dining room was the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. The air felt thick, heavy with an unspoken guilt that hung over the table like a suffocating fog. My father slowly pushed his chair back, the wooden legs scraping sharply against the hardwood floor. He opened his mouth, trying to find words, but nothing came out except a weak, raspy stutter. "Julian," he finally managed, his voice entirely stripped of the fragile, trembling despair he had used over the phone just hours earlier. You weren't supposed to arrive until tomorrow evening. Your flight details." "My flight was moved up," I said, my voice dangerously calm, though my heart was hammering violently against my ribs. I looked past him, taking in the scene. The crystal wine glasses, the untouched packages wrapped in glossy paper piled neatly on the sideboard, the expensive Italian takeout containers spread across the table. This wasn't the lonely, desolate retirement home of a grieving widower. This was a celebration. A family dinner. The younger woman slowly stood up, smoothing down the front of her expensive silk blouse. She didn't look terrified or caught in the act. Instead, she looked annoyed, casting a cold, assessing glance in my direction. "Arthur, is this him?" she asked, her tone entirely too familiar, dripping with a casual possession that made my skin crawl. "Is this the son you told me was too busy with his corporate life to ever visit his own father?" My chest constricted. I stepped further into the room, my gaze shifting between the woman and the teenage boy who had now stepped back, watching us with wide, defensive eyes. "Who are these people, Dad?" I asked, keeping my eyes locked on my father. "On the phone," you cried. "You told me you hadn't spoken to a soul in weeks. You said you were staring at the walls, wishing you had family around for the holidays. You begged me to drop everything and come." My father lowered his head, unable to meet my eyes. He reached out with a shaky hand and gripped the edge of the table. "Julian, sit down. Let me explain. Things change. Life gets complicated when you're old and alone." "Don't give me that," I snapped, the calm facade finally cracking as 34 years of filial duty and built-up resentment rushed to the surface. "You lied to me. You manufactured a crisis to drag me 600 miles across the country. Why? If you wanted to throw a dinner party with your new family, why drag me into it?" "Because," the woman interjected, stepping smoothly between us with a chilling lack of shame, "he wanted you to see what you were being replaced by. My name is Elena, and this is my son, Leo. We've been living here with Arthur for the past 8 months. And to answer your question, Julian, he didn't invite you here for the holidays. He invited you here so he could hand you his final decision." I stared at Elena, the words hanging in the cold air like jagged glass. Replaced? The concept was so absurd, so entirely detached from reality, that for a second, I thought I was losing my mind. "Replaced?" I echoed, letting out a dry, humorless laugh that held no amusement at all. "Lady, I am his only son. I spent the last 5 years calling him every Sunday, sending him money for home repairs, flying out for every major holiday, and rearranging my entire existence to make sure he wasn't alone after Mom died. You don't just replace that with a stranger you met online." My father finally raised his head, his expression hardening into something stubborn and unrecognizable. The guilt in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, defensive pride. "You call once a week, Julian," my father said, his voice steady now, lacking any of the feeble crack it had held on the phone. 10 minutes on a Sunday while you drive to your office or sit in some coffee shop in the city. 10 minutes of small talk about weather and real estate. Meanwhile, Elena takes care of this house. Leo shovels the snow off the driveway and fixes the garage door when it jams. They are here. They are my life now. The betrayal hit me not with a sudden flash of anger, but with a deep, hollow numbness. All those late nights worrying about him, all those holiday flights booked at triple the price just so an old man wouldn't spend Christmas staring at a blank television screen, it had all been a game to him. Or worse, a convenience. "So that's why you dragged me here," I said quietly, the anger draining away, leaving only a sharp, icy clarity. "You didn't want me to celebrate Christmas. You wanted an audience. You wanted to stage a scene to tell me that I don't matter anymore, to hand over your life to people you've known for a few months." Elena smiled, a tight, victorious smirk that she didn't even try to hide. "Arthur wanted a clean break, Julian. He wanted to make sure you understood that his estate, his savings, and this house are no longer part of your inheritance equation. We went to a lawyer yesterday morning. The papers are already drawn up. Everything is being transferred to a family trust managed by me." I looked at my father, searching the face of the man who had taught me how to ride a bike, who had held my hand on my first day of school. The man sitting before me was a stranger wearing my father's skin, warped by manipulation and the desperate vanity of an aging man who couldn't bear the thought of being alone, so he bought a ready-made family and discarded the real one. "You really think she cares about you, Dad?" I asked, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You think these people love you for you, or for the roof over their heads and the retirement fund in your bank account?" Elena gasped, stepping forward as if she had been physically struck, while Leo looked down at his sneakers, suddenly very interested in the floorboards. But my father slammed his hand down on the mahogany table, the sound echoing sharply through the quiet house. "Enough, Julian," my father shouted, his face flushing red. "I am a grown man. I can make my own choices. And as for your flight, well, you wanted to see me for the holidays, didn't you? Consider your wish granted. Now, you can take your bag, walk right back out that front door, and find a hotel in town, because there is no room for you in this house anymore. I didn't yell. I didn't beg, and I certainly didn't plead for a place to sleep under the roof of a man who had just traded 34 years of father-son history for a woman he met at a local garden center 8 months ago. Instead, I looked at my father, truly looked at him, and felt a profound, irreversible shift inside my chest. The last remaining tether of obligation snapped. "You're right, Dad," I said, my voice entirely level, devoid of any anger or pain. "I did want to see you. And I saw you." I turned my back on them, walking down the long hallway without looking back once. Behind me, I could hear Elena's breathless, hurried voice trying to smooth things over, and my father coughing in a sudden fit of nervous panic, but I didn't stop. I grabbed my heavy duffel coat from the hook, zipped it tight against the freezing December gale waiting outside, and stepped back out onto the porch. I didn't bother looking for a hotel. I walked 3 blocks down to the corner diner, ordered a cup of black coffee that tasted like ash, and used my phone to book the very first flight back home for sunrise. 2 weeks later, the legal reality caught up with them. Because my father had acted in clear cognitive decline, orchestrated and manipulated while under the influence of heavy prescription medications for a recent hip surgery, my lawyer filed an emergency injunction freezing his assets before Elena could fully liquidate his accounts. The bank statements revealed a chilling trail: over $40,000 funneled into Elena's personal debts, luxury car payments, and credit cards in less than 6 months. When the local authorities and Adult Protective Services finally stepped in, the illusion shattered. Elena packed her bags and vanished into the night before the ink on the fraud investigation warrants could even dry, taking her teenage son and whatever cash they could cram into the trunk of her sedan. My father was left sitting alone in that massive, freezing house. No catered Italian food. No festive lights. Just the ticking of the grandfather clock and the bitter taste of his own catastrophic mistake. He called me last Tuesday. It wasn't a cry for help or a demand for attention, it was a weak, broken whisper asking if I could ever forgive him. I told him the truth: I forgave him for being weak, and I forgave him for being foolish. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean moving back into a house built on betrayal. I arranged for a professional caregiver to check in on him twice a week, handled his medical needs from a distance, and hung up the phone. Some people spend their entire lives chasing the illusion of a new beginning, only to burn down the very foundation that kept them safe in the cold. Would you have uprooted your life for a parent who ended up treating you like a stranger, and would you have gone back to help them when their world fell apart? Tell me what you think in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Dad Revenge Lab for more real stories about family, betrayal, and justice.